Hello, and welcome to Chapter 5 of the OpenStax Psychology textbook. My name is Matthew Poole, and today we are going over sensation and perception. Whenever it comes to sensation and perception, you can't have one without the other. It's like breathing in and out, and we'll get into how that operates here in the coming slides. But I want to define sensation before and as well as perception before we get to putting it all together. Whenever it comes to sensation, this is whenever, quite simply, sensory receptors detect sensory information or stimuli. Now, we all have what's known as sensory receptors. These are specialized neurons that respond to specific types of. Now, whenever it comes to sensory systems, we all know about our classic five senses. We've got vision, hearing, smell, taste, as well as touch. But through science, we've discovered that's a little too simplistic. We also have other senses such as balance, body position, movement, pain, as well as temperature. Okay. So, what is needed for sensation to occur? This is what's known as absolute threshold. The absolute threshold, to give a definition to it, this is something to make note, especially if you're in a class of mine and you're going to take a test, is the minimum amount of stimulus energy that must be present for the stimulus to be detected at least 50% of the time. So, how far out in the distance at night does that candle need to be for us to be able to detect it at least 50% of the time? That is what the threshold is for sensation to occur. We also have what's known as the just noticeable difference. This is the minimum amount of stimulus energy needed to detect a difference between stimuli. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you at a restaurant where you may go to the bathroom a couple times, but each time you go to the bathroom, your friends put in a little bit of salt into your drink each time. And so eventually you then finally notice that, whoa, this tastes salty. What in the world is going on? And then you get mad at your friends and then you get a new drink. But they were testing out your just noticeable difference. They were trying to incrementally introduce a change in the stimulus to see at what point would you be able to detect the minimum difference. Okay. Moving forward, we've got perception. Like I said, we can't have sensation without perception. Perception is the way that sensory information is interpreted, organized, and consciously experienced. So we get that information, but your perception is going to vary from person to person. And I'm going to test that on you here in a little bit. We've got what's known as bottom up processing as well as top down processing in our experiences. So bottom up processing is whenever we build our perceptions from sensory input. We don't have any prior experiences to be able to relate it to or to build upon. We're strictly receiving that sensation and then we are interpreting our experiences of it from bottom up. So top down processing is whenever we interpret sensation and it's influenced by available knowledge, experiences, and thoughts. So what other prior experiences can you relate this to and intermingle that with what you've previously experienced? That's top down processing. Both of those are going to be needed for your test, probably. Now, let's talk about some factors that affect perception. We've got sensory adaptation as well as inattentional blindness. So, sensory adaptation, I've got a good story about this. This is whenever we don't perceive stimuli because it remains relatively constant over prolonged periods of time. Something that our brain is really good at is filtering out information that it deems as unimportant. Whenever you first enter into a quiet classroom, you may initially notice the ticking of a clock, but over time, your brain deems it as unimportant. So it filters it out and you don't even notice. Same as like whenever you have a loud AC unit, you can hear it initially, but eventually your brain just ignores it. And here recently, something that happened to me is I was getting my truck fixed and my dad let me borrow his Subaru. And it's a newer Subaru and it's got a function, as most new cars do, where whenever you don't buckle up your seatbelt and you start driving, it will beep at you. This Subaru has a little bit of a beeping function, so it's not as annoying as others. But whenever my dad let me borrow it, he let me know, he said, yeah, I sometimes will get into my car though, and it'll go off, but I tend to just ignore it over a period of time. He asked me, is that called something in psychology? And I said, yes, that's called sensory adaptation. And he said, sensory adaptation. And he's a Southwest Virginia guy. And you could probably tell if you're listening to this video and you're not from the South, you notice my twang, I guess you could say, or my accent. But he's a Southwest Virginia boy. So he said sensory adaptation. I was like, yep, you got it, Dad. You got it. We also have another thing that affects our perception. This is what's known as inattentional blindness. This is our failure to notice something that is completely visible because of a lack of attention. This is where magicians are able to, they have a very good understanding of this, and they act on this to be able to perform their tricks. So they'll do sleight of hands and things like that to where they will, it may be in visual focus if you're paying attention to it, but because they're distracting you by making you focus on something else, they're able to get away with it and perform magic. We all, if we're not paying attention to it, things can go underneath our radar pretty constantly. There are other things that can influence our perception, such as illusions. So our brain can get tricked a lot of times because of the way things are organized. So in figure A, it may look like the line on the right is larger than the line on the left because of the way the arrows are positioned. But if you take away the arrows, if you were to just put your hands up and remove them yourselves, you'll notice that the lines are the exact same. Also in figure B, the same situation. It looks like the black line on the very right is longer than the one on the left. But if you were to take out that structure of a house, you'll notice that the lines are the exact same. But again, our brain can be tricked pretty constantly. And that's why we don't rely on the eye test whenever we're building things, because although something may look like it's even, it's probably not. So we need measurements and tools to help us measure things. Okay, let's look at waves and wavelengths, because how we experience visual and auditory uh, stimuli is both in the forms of waves. They're different waves, but we still um, experience them in the form of waves. To measure these waves, we measure them in wavelengths as well as amplitude. So your wavelengths are measured from peak to peak of that wave. And then the amplitude is measured from the peak to the trough. So from the very top to the very bottom. Amplitude, top to bottom, wavelength from peak to peak. All right. That's very important, especially when it comes to colors. How we interpret colors and why they're different, why we see different colors is because of the different lengths of the wavelength. So, whenever it comes to longer wavelengths, these are interpreted as reds, intermediate wavelengths, these are our greens, and shorter wavelengths are blues and violets. And the amplitude from top to bottom, remember, determines the brightness of that particular color. So whenever there's a larger amplitude, those appear brighter. So smaller amplitudes or shorter amplitudes make the colors darker. Moving forward, let's talk about the anatomy and physiology of how you see. So to give a little bit of definition to the different structures, we have what's known as a cornea. The cornea over our eyeball is like a protective layer of our eyes. Now we have also got our pupils, which is the dark um, center, the black of your eye, and then your iris is going to be the color of your eye. So we all have different eye colors, but they all revolve around the same view, and then some can be a mix between the two. So, what helps in the pupil's dilation as well as the constriction is the muscles that are found within the iris. So our pupil can dilate or constrict based on the amount of light energy that we are receiving. Of course, we know that whenever we have a bright light that's shown into our eyes, our pupil will dilate because it's like, whoa, that's plenty of light information. We got it. Whereas in darkness, our pupils will dilate because it's trying to let in as much light information as it possibly can so you can see better. Whenever you first enter into a dark room, it may seem pitch black, but your pupil at the same time is dilating. And then you'll notice your vision in darkness. It may not be super great, but at least you'll be able to see a little bit more than you did whenever you initially entered into the dark room. It's because it's trying to let in as much light information as it possibly can to help you. All right. Moving forward, whenever we receive this information, of course, anything in the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere. Information that's in the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere. And ultimately, they end up at the back of the brain in the occipital lobe for final processing. We have what's known as optic nerves. These are these extending parts past your eyeball, and they make an X-shaped structure that's known as the optic chiasm or chiasm, whichever way you want to pronounce them. So that's what that X-shaped structure is. Now, what's interesting about our vision is that if we focus on a particular item for a period of time and then look away, we develop what's known as an after image or a negative view of what we're looking at. So if you were to stare at this image, you can pause it if this video if you'd like to. If you focus in on this white dot here for at least 30 to 60 seconds, and then you look away at the wall, you'll notice that there's a negative after image of this flag. So a pretty neat thing. Also, some kids will stare at the sun for a brief period of time for whatever reason, and then they look away and then they're blinking and they see like this negative after image. That's what's known as the opponent process theory. Depth perception. So, depth perception, to give a definition to, is our ability to perceive spatial relationships in 3D. Now, a lot of things in our life only really rely on your monocular cues, but we still need our binocular cues to be able to get a better view of depth, right? So, whenever it comes to binocular disparity, this is a slightly different view of the world that each eye receives. So, that's why you notice if you were to blink back and forth between your eyes, it shifts back and forth. And that's because your eyes are trying to get a little bit of a different view of the world so it can get the best possible image of depth for you. So it can be as accurate as you possibly can. Now, a lot of monocular cues include linear perspective as well as interposition. Perspective is whenever two parallel lines seem to converge. So you only need your monocular cue for that. That's why whenever you're looking at an image, a lot of us in art class have created this image of a road that is going in the distance. And so what we're doing is we're creating almost like a V shape structure to make it look like it's ascending into the distance. Okay. And so we'll make our buildings here to the side incrementally smaller until they're very tiny to make the view that it is a road that's out in the distance. Okay. Moving forward, we've got hearing. How do we experience hearing? Let's look at the anatomy and physiology of this. So your ear is divided into three divisions: your outer, middle, and inner ear. So your outer ear includes the pinna as well as the tympanic membrane. Okay. So you can look here that you've got your outer ear and things like that. And we'll go into the minute details here in just a second, but you've got your middle ear, which includes your three ossicles. You can see them a little bit closer here where you've got your malleus, your incus, as well as your stapes. Okay. Your inner ear includes your cochlea, as well as your basilar membrane. So that's what you can see right here in figure 516. All right. And so whenever it comes to, excuse me, I got a little ahead of myself. So whenever it comes to the actual, how does um, auditory information get processed? We receive this information and it will ultimately impact your pinna. It will go through your auditory canal, will end up at this malleus right here where it's stimulated by your eardrum. So the oval structure you're seeing here is your eardrum. The malleus is going to be stimulated, it vibrates, and then that vibration will allow for your stapes to puncture the oval window. And at this point, what will happen is there is fluid that will begin to circulate here and is stimulated by the basilar membrane and hair cells within your cochlea. And so when the hair cells are stimulated by this fluid, it then sends that information to the brain. Okay. So let's talk about some things that can cause difficulty to hearing. So we all know about deafness in general. It's the partial or complete inability to hear. We have what's known as congenital deafness, which is just deafness from birth. Individuals are born with it. We also have what's known as conductive hearing loss. And so this is whenever there's a failure in the vibration of your eardrum or movement of the ossicle. So it's in that middle part where that information is received, but then your eardrum and other areas of that middle ear, such as ossicles, fail to vibrate and puncture that oval window. And the way that we can navigate this is through the assistance of hearing aids. As well, there's a number of contributing factors to hearing loss, which can include age. As we know, over time, hearing tends to decline. And especially if you have a job or an occupation that constantly exposes you to loud noises, this can damage your ability to hear effectively over time. As well as there may be, just in general, a genetic predisposition for you to develop a form of hearing loss. Finally, we have sensory neural hearing loss. This is the failure to transmit neural signals from the cochlea to the brain. This is super unfortunate because it gets that information gets right to the very end, but the cochlea does not ultimately send that information onto the brain for processing. So, very unfortunate situation. We have Gestalt psychology. It's very influential in perception. And we talked about it in chapter one briefly, where the basic principle behind Gestalt psychology is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we tend to lump things together in our nature. And we're going to talk about a few of these principles here in the coming slides to give some more context to this. So we, in general, will navigate our world in a figure ground relationships can depend from person to person. And I'll show you here in just a second what I mean. We also have proximity, similarity, continuity, as well as closure. All right. In figure 23, this is a good example of showing the figure ground relationship. So again, the figure is the focus of the visual field and the ground is what's the background. As you can see here in figure 5.23, you have what can either look like to you a white vase or two dark faces looking at one another. Okay. And so that can show how for some of us, we put the figure or the focus as that white vase, or we put the figure as the two dark faces looking at each other. And then that background is just either the black or white. Perception is in the eye of the beholder. We also have the Gestalt principle of proximity, where we group things that are close together. We tend to have that predisposition. So in figure A, that's why figure A more so looks like to us a square of circles, whereas figure B looks like two rows of circles, three that's occurring three times. So we're not going to say that figure B is a large square of circles comparatively to figure A. It looks like three consistent blocks of circles. Moving forward, we also tend to group things based on similarity. So this is why instead of in figure A in the previous slide, that it looks like a square of circles, this looks like alternating rows of circles that are tan and light blue. Next is the Gestalt principle of continuity. So that we tend to group things and look at a figure like this and say that it's smooth flowing lines rather than just jagged broken lines that are meeting at the center. Next, we have the principle of closure, where we tend to complete objects, even if they're not complete. So all of us would say that the figure on the left looks like a circle. Yes, it may have pieces missing, but ultimately it would make up a circle. And then the figure to the makes up a rectangle, even though there are some pieces missing to it. Okay, now we're going to finish on a fun note by talking about the Rorschach inkblot test. And I'm going to test your perception of this. And we're going to look at what personality psychologists may have thought about your answers back in the day. So this is a really good exercise to see how a lot of us are going to have varying different answers to what we're perceiving. And this personality assessment, I don't hold a lot of value to because I don't know that the measures of the Rorschach inkblot test are going to be a reliable thing to generalize among a population. But it didn't stop personality psychologists from using this to try and determine things about what you thought and who you are. And ultimately, their main goal was to see consistencies in what your answer is. So let's look at how personality psychologists may have thought about your answers back in the day. Now, with each of these, I'm going to encourage that you pause the video before I give the answer. I'll pause briefly so you have the opportunity to do so. But the only instructions for you up until this point is to simply look at the image in front of you and think about or say what it is that you are viewing. So what you're looking at right here is card one of the Rorschach inkblot test. And I'm going to pause here in just a moment so you can pause the video, and then we will reconvene and I will tell you what personality psychologist thought of your answer. So what do you see? Okay. If you pause the video and are returning to us, card one, this is made up, of course, of black ink. Because this is the first card a person will see, this can provide insight into how the patient will take on a task that is new and stressful. People will often describe this card as looking like a bat, a moth, a butterfly, or the face of some kind of animal like an elephant or rabbit. This card generally reflects the person. Okay. So here are some of the answers to your answers or explanations to your answers. While bat can mean something unclean or demonic for some, for others, it can mean navigating through darkness and rebirth. Butterflies can symbolize transition, transformation, as well as the ability to grow, change, and overcome. Moths can symbolize feeling overlooked, ugly, as well as our weaknesses and annoyances. The face of an animal, and particularly an elephant, can symbolize the ways in which we confront problems and a fear of looking into our inner issues. It can also symbolize the elephant in the room and comment on an issue that is being tiptoed around. All right, so this is card three. We're not going to go through every single card in the interest of time, but please look at this image and think about okay. So the third card features red and black ink and symbolizes how a person relates to other people in social interactions. Common responses to this card include seeing two people, one person looking into a mirror, a butterfly, or a moth. Seeing two people eating with one another symbolizes the participant's social life is nourishing. Seeing two people washing their hands can symbolize insecurity, a sense of not being clean, or paranoid feelings. Viewing two people participating in some form of game can indicate a competitive view of social relationships. Seeing a person looking at their reflection in the mirror can symbolize self absorption, being oblivious to others, or not seeing people for who they are. Okay. This is card four. Take a moment, think about what you see here, and we will reconvene. Okay. The fourth card is often known as the father card. It is composed of black ink and features shading. Often viewed as a large and sometimes intimidating or frightening figure, this is categorized as male more than female. This ink blot relates to the person's feelings toward authority and their upbringing. Common responses include seeing a large animal or monster or seeing animal hide or animal skin. Okay, here are the explanations for your answers. Seeing a large animal or monster can symbolize feelings of inferiority towards authority or amplified fear of authority figures, including father figures. Seeing animal hide or animal skin can symbolize great discomfort when discussing the subject of the father. On the opposite end, it can symbolize that the individual has less of a problem with authority and inferiority. All right, moving on. This is card seven. Take a moment, think about your answer. Okay. This card is made up of black ink and is usually linked to femininity. Due to the fact that common responses to this card include women and children, this is known as the mother card. If the person has problems responding to this card, it can be due to problems they are facing with female figures in their life. Common responses to this card include heads or faces of women or children and kissing. Seeing the heads of women symbolizes feelings associated with one's view of his or her mother. These feelings will also influence their views of women overall. Seeing the heads of children symbolizes feelings associated with childhood and the need to care for the inner child. This can also indicate that the relationship that the participant has with their mother needs to be looked at and healed. Seeing heads about to kiss symbolizes the desire for affection and reconnection with a mother figure. This can indicate that there was once a close relationship with the mother, that it is now sought in other relationships, be they romantic or social. Okay, this is card nine. Take a moment, pause the video if needed, and we will reconvene. Okay, this card is made up of green, pink, and orange inks. This ink blot is characterized by its vagueness and the inability to visualize a specific thing. Most people struggle to find what they see in it. It is for this reason that this card explores how well a person handles a lack of structure and vagueness. Common responses to come out of this card are either a generic human form or some indeterminate evil shape. If a human is viewed, the way the individual feels about this person can symbolize how the participant deals with unstructured time and information. Seeing evil could symbolize that in order to feel comfort, structure is required in the participant's life and that they don't tolerate vagueness well. Okay, this is card 10 and the final card that we'll be going over in the Rorschach inkblot test. Take a moment and we will discuss your answers. Okay, the last card in the Rorschach test is the most colorful, with orange, yellow, pink, green, gray, and blue inks. Structurally speaking, this card is similar to card 8, but it has complexity similar to card 9, which we just looked at. And while many find this card to be pleasant, those who do not enjoy the complexity of card 9 may feel the same way with this card, which can indicate a difficulty in dealing with similar, synchronous, or coincidental stimuli. Common responses to this ink blot include crab, lobster, spider, a rabbit head, snakes, or caterpillars. Seeing a crab can either symbolize a tendency to cling onto things or other people, or it can symbolize perseverance. Seeing a lobster can symbolize strength, perseverance, and an ability to conquer small problems. Seeing a spider can symbolize fear, a feeling of entanglement, or a feeling of being trapped in an uncomfortable situation as a result of telling lies. It can also symbolize an overbearing mother and feminine power. Seeing the heads of rabbits can symbolize a positive outlook. Snakes can symbolize danger, feeling lied to or deceived, or being afraid of the unknown. Because this card is at the end of the test, seeing caterpillar symbolizes room for growth and an understanding that you are constantly reinventing yourself and evolving. So that will complete our review of the Rorschach inkblot test. I hope you enjoyed that. You probably didn't find out everything that you've ever wanted to know about yourself, but it's still a fun exercise to go through to show you how perception can vary from person to person. I always love this in an in-person class session because of all the vastly different answers that are given. So that's where we will conclude today for chapter 5. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. And I'll see you in chapter 6, where we will talk about learning. Have a good one. Bye bye.